The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome back to the Bosshole Chronicles, where we never want to waste a good opportunity to learn from a bad boss. And we are about the business of Bosshole intervention, Bosshole prevention. And I'm joined today. I'm Sarah Best, your co-host, joined today, as always, by John Brower, our other co-host. Good morning, John. How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. I am great, as a matter of fact. So excited about today because we're venturing into new territory, are we not?
We are. This is a first. So for our listeners today, you will have a firsthand look and listen to Bosshole intervention and the courage and vulnerability it takes to step up. We have a real life situation. We have an amazing duo, a pair, a manager and a former direct report, who are going to join us today and share their story. John, would you please introduce our special guest for today?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. Well, let me first introduce Olivier Aries.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Sarah.
Olivier, great to have you here. I want to let our listeners know we've known Olivier for, oh my gosh, it's been a number of years. We met Olivier when he was with the Predictive Index. He since then has co-founded a company called the Thrive Collective. And we've had the opportunity to continue our work with Olivier. You're going to learn a little bit more about him and his story. I don't want to take that away in the intro, but he's a remarkable individual. And when we were at Optima, and our listeners, by now, you know, a lot of stuff happened at Optima. There was such great thought partnership. And Olivier came to us and said, I've got a Bosshole story and I'd like to share it, but I'm the Bosshole in this story and I have to bring in somebody else. And that very special somebody else is Trish Davis-Gray. And Trish is the senior digital learning producer at the Predictive Index. And this is the duo of which Sarah was speaking, a former manager and direct report. Trish, it is so great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm so glad Olivier had this idea. We'll talk about how he's an ideas guy in a little bit. He's an innovator. But I'm appreciative that you all are talking about this topic. It's so vital to your success and your happiness at work. And I'm really kind of proud to represent the individual contributor side. There's so many resources for managers on how to be a great manager, and there's not a lot of help for us on the receiving end of saying, and here's what you can do to help your manager. And I like that part of it.
Absolutely. Great insight. And we always talk about organizations cannot afford to overlook the vital role of the individual contributor and the pathway of the individual contributor. So that being said, I'm going to step back, and Olivier, we just want to turn it over to you so you can set the stage for us and take us into this story of, as should I say, just your wandering in potentially into the Bosshole Zone.
Thank you, John. I have to tell you, I have mixed feelings being featured on a podcast about the bossholing.
Wait, it's a verb. Bossholing.
Bossholing is now a verb. That's right.
So maybe we can start the story by telling you that I grew up as a management consultant, kind of the hardcore type. I spent nearly 18 years in a very large global management consulting firm. And as all of you know, it's a very command and control environment. And by design, it's not because managers want to be harsh on their teams, but in management consulting firms, the knowledge is largely built into the process. Therefore, those companies who hire a lot of junior consultants have to rely on documentation of processes and approaches and frameworks, because those firms hire people not on aptitude, but on attitude, the ability to learn fast, the ability to do analytical work rather than personal experience. So nearly by design in those firms, you have to have a lot of knowledge coming from the manager and a lot of direction coming from the top of the organization on teams. As a result, I I grew up literally as a professional in an environment where, as a junior consultant or a team member, you have to nearly blindly follow direction. You have to trust the vision. You have to trust the process that is mandated by your manager, by your principal, by your vice president. And, I grew up through the ranks, so I went from being the sort of directed to being at some point the generator of the vision and the general approach. So you could say I thrived in that model that doesn't give a lot of leeway to individual initiative, and that's the way it should be. Very little free agency in many ways in this world that is highly documented and highly codified. And then, a few years ago, I left this world and I joined a very different environment. I joined a company called the Predictive Index. We're all kind of connected on this call to the Predictive Index, and maybe some of your listeners are too. Became in charge of professional services, which was kind of sort of directly connected to my past experience as a consultant. But I landed in a very different culture. I went from this very directed, controlled way of delivering work into a culture that was much more transparent, much more focused on communication. I wouldn't say free agency because, obviously all employees end up working towards a single vision, but where I think every employee had much more initiative, were encouraged and emboldened probably to speak up without necessarily accepting, I'd say, orders by design, because sometimes as a consultant, I would have to give orders. And so I think the story about my experience starts at that point of transition, where I kind of joined this culture that was markedly different from what I experienced for so many years. And so, fast forward couple of months, maybe after I joined PI, which is short of Predictive Index, and Trish was on my team, along with a number of other individuals. And there was a sort of what I would call a negative epiphany one day, where I had sort of crafted what I thought was my vision for the team and our role for the broader organization. I felt we have fairly ambitious objectives for my team. And I would say I didn't feel quite a lot of traction when I was engaging the team. We were having regular meetings and our stand-ups and things like this. But the negative epiphany, I think, was one morning when we met in that kind of nice conference room on the side of our area. And I, as far as I can remember, and Trish, I'm going to rely on you to refresh my memory, but we had this conversation about what we should do, and I have this plan and all those different elements. And I stopped and I had this realization that I was completely disconnected from the team. I saw people looking at me, silent. I was like, something bad just happened. And maybe Trish, that's the moment you should step in, because I think you joined the story with a very active role at this moment, I think.
I had been at PI for a few years before Olivier joined, and I came over to his team. And so I was already kind of in the flow of how things work and understanding how the company operates and the culture that we try and foster and things like that. And I was really relatively new to the product team, and I was new to him being my manager. And so I think one of the things that's really important to me is flagging those things when I think, somebody's struggling here, because I like to help people. I'm a helper, and I want to have a good time at work. And I know that, one of my things is I always assume good intent. Somebody's trying to do something good here, and they're just stuck, and I need to help them. There's a skill gap or something missing from what they have experienced so far at PI, and I need to help them come in and say, this isn't really working. You might want to try this kind of thing. It's just, I think part of my nature is to be that helper, and I like a really great working environment. And I was thinking, about when I was thinking of coming here, of like, when did that start? What happened to make me into that person? And I realized when I was a very young professional, 20 something years ago, I had a job, which I didn't understand at the time, but when I went to a different company and learned about, it was a hostile working environment. And I had no idea. I didn't know what that was. I was 21, 22, and I didn't know that was a thing. But I do remember crying on my way into work, crying on the way home from work, dreading everything about it and being like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And I got a new opportunity. So I left that place, and I promised myself that, when you're 20 in your 20s and you're looking forward and you're like, gosh, I got to work for like 45, 50 years here. Like that can't be my life all the time. That was miserable. What can I do to change that? And so that's when I started to like realize I needed to build a muscle. Went into another job, another company, great company, and started to learn. They had a great culture of transparency and communication and all those things that PI has, and has also fostered the environment of like, ask questions, help people succeed, be a part of the solution. Don't just stand in the hallway with your colleague and complain. Do something helpful. Like, managers are not mind readers. They're not managing just one person. They're managing a variety of personalities with a variety of needs at work. And how are they to know that when they first step into a role? So when Olivier was sort of struggling, and I can kind of tell you have a feeling in the room that I don't know if his messages are landing, probably the right thing to do. He's brilliant. He's got great ideas, and this is the way we should be going, but feels like the room's not bought in.
Okay.
Feels like there's that quiet awkwardness.
Sure.
And so I think I just had a chat with Olivier about, I think what's missing is trust. I think we need to build some trust on the team. And two things is like, one, in order to get to that place, Olivier had to realize that there was a weird feeling in the room, and he did. So he's very like self-aware, and he knew like, something's off, Not every manager knows that.
Right.
But regardless of whether they do or not, you have to step in and say, hey, I think this is where the team is struggling, or this is where I can help. And you work with your manager and say, let's do this. I want to do the vision that you're talking about. It's the right one, or whatever it is. But I think we need to do a little bit of work first. And I don't know, Olivier, if that's how it happened to your memory, but that's how it happens to my memory.
Well, since I had COVID, I'm not sure I can trust my memory. But I would say, I think you're spot on. As a consultant, you're encouraged to think that you have to be the smartest person in the room. Because in many ways, your clients buy you to be that person, buy your services, and they pay you for being that person. And so it was certainly hard to, in many ways, acknowledge that I was missing something, and therefore maybe I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I hadn't seen all of the dynamics here, but a couple of good things happened that are nearly coincidental to this situation. I had started to read, I think it's Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. And you know that Brené Brown's main theme is really about how you have to be vulnerable, how you have to drop the armor to be an effective, leader, a good human being, a trusted friend. And I was working with a coach at the time. Her name is Jennifer. She's still my coach after all these years. And I turned to Jennifer to get some guidance because I was retreading a new territory. I'd never had to feel that I needed to be trusted for my teams before as a consultant to be effective. And here I am feeling that I have to earn the trust of this team. So, kudos to Jennifer for pointing me in that direction. What she encouraged me to do was to start by having simple team exercises focused on trust. And that's Trish, if I recall, that's what we did next. One exercise was actually very simple. It was to have the team think about the very concept of trust. And you can lead that with simple questions. One of the most effective of which I think is try to remember a moment where you felt there was trust around you. And what did you feel? What do you think caused this environment to provide the trust you need? And my experience, because then of course I've used that exercise multiple times in my life after that. Most people will respond that the moments where they feel the most trust is often when they're with family members or very good friends. Why? because in that environment, they know they won't be judged.
Mm.
And I think this idea that you can be yourself without the fear of being judged negatively by others is what's the trigger that unlocks the possibility of being yourself. And
Yeah.
being yourself means being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
That's called
so
psychological safety, by the way.
that's
That
called
is exactly
psychological
the
safety.
definition of psychological safety. And if I may, I want to back up for a second if we can. And I want to focus on Trish. Trish, you, and I wrote this down. I just had a chat with Olivier. You so nonchalantly kind of indicated that you had this awareness, you knew something was off and you wanted to help. So you had this chat. I was thinking as you said that, wow, like what a unique gifting you have to be more focused on, okay, something's not right here, but I can see it. And I think I'd like to offer this feedback. I could imagine myself and others ruminating and kind of dissecting that thought in our heads and wait, like, should we fretting? Should I bring this? Is it my place? Is it my job to do that? You just did it. And could we talk for a minute about, because I think that's what we're about, encouraging and helping our listeners appreciate when you find yourself in that situation, you don't have to be a victim. You can be cause in the matter of incredible transformation for a person, for a whole entire team and an organization, just by saying, hey, here's what I see going on. So what was that like for you? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I had to learn over time. I had, when I first started out, I had some not great managers and I didn't really understand. And then I started to think, God, this is just the way the world is. Like, you just have to show up and shut up and get it done. And that's not really, doesn't feel good. And we're going to have to work for a long time. I want to be happy. I want to be really motivated. When that alarm clock goes off, I want to be like, let's do this. That's the feeling I want to have when I'm going to work. And that when I left that horrible job, I was like, I don't want to feel that again.
Right.
So what can I do to be a part of that thing? And like, I realized, so the company that I went to was Sam Adams with Jim Cook, the founder. And he has a couple rules. If you have read his book, Quench Your Own Thirst, he talks about managing and he talks about people. He's a very people-centric person. And he's got a couple of rules. One is the FU rule, which is kind of kind of out of the box. He's kind of outside the box thinker, which is when you're having a conflict at work, there's no levels. If you're not happy and if you're struggling, if you have questions, if somebody hurt you, if somebody upset you in some way, whether they've been here one day and it's their first day of work, or they're the senior vice president of something, you have to feel empowered to say, hey, time out. That didn't go the way I expected, and here's why. And the important part of that is the here's why, and here's what I'd like to do going forward. So it's very solution-based thinking. And that's all it is, really. It's like when your computer won't start or is like, acting up, you restart it. It's the same with your manager. Like, hey, that didn't work for me. That didn't feel good, or I think you might not have picked up on that energy in the room. Let me see if we can help, and let's do some things like this. So, and the other one that was at Sam Adams was discuss the undiscussables. So really nothing's off the table. Show up as your authentic self, talk about the hard things, disagree with your manager in the room if you think they're going down a wrong path, ask questions, get the answers you need to be happy and successful. I was there for almost 14 years. That I had that time to learn that skill, and managing up and saying, oh, I can tell my manager I think they're wrong. That's scary.
Right.
That's a scary thing to do when you're first starting out in your career, because you think, gosh, they're going to hate me forever. I'm not going to get promoted. I'm not going to get the opportunities I'd like to get, and those kinds of things. But how you do it is really important. I always say, like, I'm not super interested in what you do. That's a skill, and those are great. And I'm fascinated by all things, but I'm interested in how you got it done. How did you treat people along the way? How did you make sure everybody felt included? How did you make sure that you realize your own strengths and gaps and learn and get the people on your team that need to fill those gaps for you? And it's all Olivier that did all this work. He recognized that there was a weird feeling in the room. He had the wherewithal to be open and receive this feedback and then make actual change. Like, he went and did something about it. Not all managers do that, but it seems to me like it's something that I learned after a really horrible experience, and it worked for me, and I enjoyed it because I was helping managers be more successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tell a manager that, trust is really important on a team. They're going to take that wherever they go. Once they see it's successful, the next people they manage are going to feel that, and they're going to have a better work environment. And that's kind of what I'm about, like authenticity and leaving the path behind me easier for the next person and helping that person.
So if I may, I just going back to that moment, I think valuable takeaway for our listeners is, Trish, you actually had some tools, you had experience, at least 14 years of seeing a healthier environment where you worked that muscle. You understood, I'm not going to sit idly by. I understand the value of my stepping forward and providing authentic feedback to my manager. You brought that with you into the team setting with Olivier. And on the other side of it, Olivier, I think from your perspective, you had the sensitivity, or your radar was up and you're thinking something's not right. Something is not landing. I have to believe that there's a level of emotional intelligence that is woven into that and your ability to recognize it. But I'm kind of interested in moments, and the moment, okay, so Trish, I'm putting myself in that meeting room. You walk out of that meeting room. I don't know how many other team members were there. Did you just sort of all automatically say to yourself, I got to go have a conversation with Olivier? Or were other people going, Trish, you got to go have this conversation with Olivier. You got it together. You've got this experience. Just take us to that moment. And then Olivier, when you received that,
that's what I want to know.
I want to know about that.
Yeah.
Because
what was your first thought?
Yeah, but Trish, what was the impetus to say? Was it that simple, just to go, after this meeting, I'm going to take him aside and have a conversation, or just a little bit of an insight in that?
I'm going to give you an answer I don't really like to give, but it's like a little bit of both.
Okay.
There's like that I'm feeling this and I don't like that. So I definitely feel like I want to, work to fix this, because I don't want to show up in this environment every day. I want it to be better. But there's also but it is just me. Maybe I'm misreading something.
Okay.
Let me get a gut check. And it's not in a gossipy kind of way, but it's like hey, I thought that felt like an awkward moment. Did you know that? Was that weird? Was he being weird? Am I misinterpreting the feeling in the room? Because I could be off.
So you would own that as well. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So, and again, for those listeners out there that don't have the benefit of the experience you had, Trish, to get to a point of the courage to do that, that's what I'm taking away from your comments, is that you need to work that muscle and understand, I want to be a part of making this a healthier place. And if that means having the courage to go to talk to my manager, I want to do that. Now,
yeah, and I was fortunate because PI had a very similar, same or better, open environment, and
right.
We're all in this together, and they understand happiness at work and your mental health at work and all those things. And it's people step up to help each other.
Right.
You wouldn't drive up to the coffee shop and just be like, coffee, and expect them to know exactly how you like your coffee.
Right.
You're gonna end up with a crappy cup of coffee, right?
Right.
So why would you expect to get a new manager and them know exactly what you need and what you want?
Right.
That's silliness to me. I just can't comprehend it. I'm a very pragmatic person. And it's like, okay, they just don't understand, and let me help them.
And by the way, in all fairness to our listeners who do get PI and understand it, Trish, you're a controller, correct? And Olivier, you're a venturer. So Olivier, Trish comes to you, shares this. What the heck was that like?
Well, you just mentioned I was a venturer, and I was going back to how PI defines a venture, and I have here behaviors are assertive, analytical, and driving. So, imagine a venture getting feedback that they're not doing the right thing. Mixed feelings for sure. In many ways, being analytical, I think that I already knew that something was off, right? And not just at this meeting, this meeting where I presented my plan was the sort of culmination of this disconnect.
Right.
But, I wasn't completely oblivious to the fact that I felt it wasn't quite right in the weeks and maybe months leading to this. So in many ways, there's some relief that finally, what's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And, kudos to Trish for having the courage to come to me and talk about this. And the other feeling is, what the hell do I do with this? Right. And I will have to admit that there's something I don't know how to do, or there's part of my performance that is not as good as what I want to do. So again, getting support, my coach was helpful. Frameworks like Brené Brown and a couple of other exercises we used were also helpful. It's interesting because, of course, hindsight's 2020, and now that in many ways my job is about helping others be vulnerable leaders and effective leaders. When you connect all the points, you realize how being vulnerable is critical to success. And there's something I want to make very clear, and I sort of learned this after having gone through those emotions myself. Being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. Doesn't mean that you're oversharing. Doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean that you're asking people to kind of carry your load. It just means that you accept that there are things that you don't know. Yes. In fact, I before I left my management consulting firm, for 2 years I was in charge of the global security for that organization. I was personally accountable for the safety of about 4,000 consultants, and we created a lot of processes around safety, business continuity, and things like this. And I'm mentioning this because when you deal with uncertainty, which was my job, anticipating scenarios and risks, it's very, very important to accept that you don't know what's going to happen. And that allows you to create scenarios, that allows you to think about a different degree of options. And in fact, if you remember, when the COVID crisis started, suddenly all leaders were thrown into this world of crisis. What do I tell my employees when there's this high degree of uncertainty? And one of the most effective ways to engage others in times of crisis is to acknowledge what you don't know, and say, listen, this is what I know, and this is what at this stage we don't know. And just acknowledging this is a trust builder. That's a well-known sort of crisis management communication trick, if you will. So being vulnerable, I think, means that you accept you don't know everything. And in this case, it was that I hadn't paid attention, and maybe I didn't know how to proactively build that trust. In fact, I have to give kudos twice to Trish, because in fact, Trish stepped up on 2 different occasions. The first one was when we had this epiphany that trust was missing, and I had to do something about it. But the second time is when I remember when we did one of those first trust exercises as a team. One of the steps in those exercises is to start sharing something that's very personal. Right? You first ask your team to reflect on what it means to feel that there's trust. Then you ask them what you could do to replicate that environment on the team, and then you put that to the test. And you invite people. You don't ask them. You invite your team members to share something that will make them feel that trust. Right? You essentially ask them to take the risk of expose themselves to test that there's no judgment. And I remember it was in a different room. It was in kind of big learning room with those big windows overlooking that wonderful vista. And Trish was the first one to speak up and told a very personal story about what happened to them in the past. And that set the stage for everybody else. I felt this, and I know the other team members felt this. If Trish is able to step up and say something that's so deeply personal, memories of old pains, then I can do this too. And all of us, I remember, around the room went and told stories that were personal, and shared maybe feelings of insecurity and whatever that was, which was the proof that we could start to have this conversation as a team without feeling judged. And I think this was really the sort of trigger. After that, the flow, the conversation were completely different. The feeling of comfort, engaging the team, the fluidity of the conversation, the ability to speak up and bounce off ideas, and this what Linda Hill from HBS calls the creative friction of teams.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to push back and disagree in a productive fashion. All this was there, whereas before there was silence and questioning. Now suddenly you had this very effective, this fireworks of ideas, and they change. So all this thanks to Trish. In fact, you talked about Optima earlier, John. I dutifully picked up one of your Bosshole Zone Defense summary sheets with all your tricks, and you list 6 different things about how you can help managers and leaders out of the Bosshole zone. And I would say Trish mentioned one that maybe you could think about adding to your list, which is making sure that the culture encourages psychological safety.
Yes.
And in this kind of counterintuitive twist, psychological safety actually helps leaders. Mm-hmm. It helps leaders, receive the feedback they need to continue to be good leaders. And in many ways, it's probably a much more fair approach to think that it's everybody's business to help leaders be great leaders. Trish is the example of somebody who felt accountable for helping me.
Mm-hmm.
But a good culture should be a culture where everybody feels accountable for helping leaders be better leaders. Mm-hmm. And you can only do this if people feel safe and secure in their ability to provide feedback the way Trish provided feedback to me.
I was going to add, probably people may be listening thinking, yeah, that's great if you have a Bosshole that is a emotionally aware person who wants to do better, but I don't have that. I have this, person who just wants to get the work done and go home kind of feeling.
Right.
And I also, to your point, had like this benefit of a company before PI where I learned a lot of great tools for those kinds of things. But I think if there's a good takeaway is like, you don't have to make it this big thing. It doesn't have to be this big, courageous thing.
Right.
There you go.
What it could be is at your next meeting with your manager, say, hey, is there anything I could stop, start, or change or be helpful with? And that could open up where your manager's like, yeah, I don't really understand why I'm not getting this feeling at the team, or I need you to help here because I'm not good at this thing. But you have to have a something that feels comfortable to you, that doesn't feel like conflict. It's all about how you go about it. Like, hey, I noticed this thing and I just didn't know. Are you aware that the room felt that way? And was it just me? And I think maybe I have some ideas on how to help. It doesn't have to be like, you're doing this wrong and you're ruining my life and I hate coming to work and all those things.
And you're a Bosshole.
And
I have a T-shirt for you. Right.
You don't have to have that sweaty, nervous moment packed with adrenaline after. I don't like the moments where, you get home from work or you shut down and you go back to your home life and you're like, oh, I should have said this.
Right.
Because that's a crappy feeling. And if you do have that, go say it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
Because keep that conversation going. I mean, I'm very lucky. You're experiencing how aware Olivier is and how open he is, how smart he is. Not everybody has those managers, but that doesn't matter. It matters about what you bring.
Yes.
Absolutely. And Trish, when you say you take that home, I mean, that just erodes your soul. I mean, it just eats away at you, and life is way too short. We at Real Good Ventures, our mission is to help people find meaning and fulfillment in their work. But let's all admit, while it can be difficult, we have an incredibly powerful tool at our disposal. You knew that Olivier was a venturer. You had incredible insight as to how he would receive, or perhaps how to approach it, at least informed how to approach Olivier as a venturer to have a challenging conversation. And you're right, we don't have to make it a big, huge deal, but at least let's approach people in a way that they'll understand. And Olivier, on your side of it, having I'm just going to say receptivity to feedback. We say that feedback is the oxygen of engagement, and managers need to seek that out. And sometimes they don't seek it out, but it's volunteered in this case. But my goodness, Olivier, to your credit, as Tricia said, receiving it and embracing it, because I'll tell you what, that kind of feedback can be a real kick to the gut. I've had it before. And as a captain, I did some real soul searching thinking, and by the way, people don't change. Okay. People adapt. And what that means is, okay, how do I take this and absorb this and embrace this? And how do I need to adapt as a captain and be a better be causing the matter, if you will, of helping and developing the people around me, but not being a roadblock or a boss hole. Those are subtle, but they're so powerful. And we're seeing the result of it right now based on this conversation.
And Trish, I just got to call out, your frame is one of ownership and influence. And we believe people can influence from any pattern, but you come at it. And I think we can all take away from that. The cool thing about your example is it's real. Like, we're not talking about theory in a book, and we're talking about real life dynamics come to solution around building trust and psychological safety.
It's true. And you have to be a curious person. You have to have a curiosity about you, and you have to have that passion to have a good environment at work, and not be the one that just turns to your coworker and gossips and trash talks somebody. Be part of the change. Like, do something so that you can show up in your authentic way. Bring your whole self, because that's where you get trust and build trust, is be able to have those conversations. And you all have had people on your podcast before that have talked about, Leonora Williamson talked about trust. She's great. Zani, what's on the back of my t-shirt? Like, those are those your back of your t-shirt. What am I missing?
Let's agree. I think there's an incredible thing we got to touch on before we wrap this bad boy up. It's vulnerability. Vulnerability is the access to trust. And what's happening, or what happened on your team, is normal. Could we just agree that this is kind of the byproduct of our unique nature, our unique drives, needs, and behaviors, trying to accomplish something together? So without some kind of intervention or on-purpose activity, it's not likely going to happen magically that we would have this trust. So I always like to say nothing wrong, like nothing's broken. We just got to build it. So it is vulnerability that is the access to psychological safety and trust. And to your point, Olivier, you accepting what you don't know and then sharing that you don't know that is huge.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's like, if you have to vote on something, you want something to go a certain way, but you don't vote, you can't complain about how it went because you didn't participate.
That's right.
If your manager is doing something that's irritating or off-putting or whatever, like just not helping your work happiness, and you don't say something, that's on you. Like, I maybe that's, individual contributors of the world are going to be like, they're nuts. But I feel like if you're not contributing to making your workplace a better place, what are you doing?
Right.
Because it has an impact on your own happiness. So you're just destroying your own happiness and spreading negativity. And I just don't like, I was in HR before, and people would come to me either just as an employee or at their exit interviews and trash their managers. And I would go back and look at their review. They have to give feedback on their managers. It would be glowing reviews. And I'm like, can't help you there. If you're not going to be honest
about it, that's exactly right.
You're not going to be vulnerable, and it is scary to have those conversations. It's definitely about your career, so it has an impact. It has a potential impact. But if you have it with your boss and it doesn't go well, speak to somebody else. Don't let it just die and be like, oh, company's not doing anything about it. Like, you have to do it. It's part of your own responsibility. Yeah.
That is such wisdom for our individual contributors out there. I want them to just really sort of absorb that and take it in. So, Olivier, for our boss holes that are listening, or managers that may not even realize they're in the Bosshole zone, Trish has given our individual contributors a wealth of a huge amount of ideas of encouragement and steps you can take. Olivier, what would you say to our managers that could be standing in the Bosshole zone?
There's hope.
There's hope. Yay.
I'll say this. In my line of job, I often say that self-awareness is a gift. And I think we should all give that gift to as many people as possible around us. But I would say it's probably actually not enough. What is more important than self-awareness is self-acceptance. And I think this idea of being able to receive feedback, the idea of agreeing that we don't know everything, this idea that we don't have to be the smartest person in the room, even as leaders and managers. It's all about accepting who we are as human beings. And one thing I've noticed is that after I started to be more vulnerable at work, I also started to be more vulnerable in general. I have two wonderful daughters who are 18 and 21. And I think when I started to be more vulnerable with them and share more about what's happening in my life and the successes and the challenges, they also started to open up more, right? We We like to say that emotions are contagious. I would say behaviors and attitudes are contagious too. You can catch other people's emotions, and they can catch your emotions as well. So if you start to do the right thing little by little, every day, slight incremental change in your behavior towards more openness, more empathy, people will react positively. And I think the message to other fellow leaders and managers is you quickly reap the benefits of your tiny changes in attitude by seeing people responding positively, and that creates this atmosphere of trust progressively. Mm-hmm. So it's really just the first step that matters. Once you start down that path, I think it sort of amplifies naturally. It's this sort of positive circle where the more you do it, the more people react positively, and they encourage you, just like Trish did, to continue down that path of self-awareness, of vulnerability, and of trust building.
I hear people say, well, we have a real engagement problem. It's like, you know what, more so, and I think about what Zani said at the opening of Optima, we have a humanity problem. And back to your point, Olivier, when we start treating each other with understanding and love and respect, yeah, that has a place in business. It absolutely does. And that's where you see organizations absolutely shine. And it's possible they are out there.
Well, if you're one of those people that find yourself in the seat like Trish has been, where you're aware of everything that's going on, maybe the opportunity from today's podcast is to evaluate, hey, what action have I been afraid to take?
Right.
Because maybe I don't have to leave this company. Maybe I don't have to go find it, my joy and fulfillment somewhere else. What can I do to be cause in the matter of creating it here?
Yeah.
So what a powerful takeaway. There are many factors that contribute to people sliding into the Bosshole zone, but a conversation can pull them out. Today's perfect proof of that. Yeah. John, we'll have access to LinkedIn profiles and ways to reach out to Trish and Olivier in our show notes, right?
Yep. We'll put that in the show notes. And we cannot thank you both enough. We've been very excited about this ever since Olivier presented the idea at Optima. You two are such a great example of what can be done. And when vulnerability and trust and empathy really take hold, we just want to thank you both so much for being on the podcast. It's been great.
Thank you for having us.
So grateful to be here. So grateful that Olivier had this idea and you were open to hearing his idea. He's got a lot of great ones. And thanks for having this conversation with us. I hope it was helpful and I hope it met your expectations.
It
Beyond.
It did indeed.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Yep. See you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guests today on the Bosshole Chronicles. And if you have a Bosshole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.